Dr. Senthil Ganesh, Vice Chairman, who made the welcoming remarks, Dr. Nandini, Past Chairman, CII, Mr. Shankar, Vice Chairman, Mr. C. Balasubramaniam, President of ICCI, Mr. P. Sriramulu, the Vice President of ICCI, the Collector, Dr. G.S. Samiran, office bearers, leaders of various industry associations, trade associations, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation, for your time, for the opportunity to speak to all of you. At the outset, let me apologize because of bad weather in Chandigarh, where I was for the GST Council. My flight was delayed. That's the reason I was a bit late coming here. I came straight from the airport. So, weather, as you know, is beyond our control. So, I apologize, but not in my control. I was listening intently and writing down many of the points mentioned here today. Let me start with a few caveats, maybe, notwithstanding what the respected collector said. You know, at the end of the day, we all have our portfolios. It's true that finance is essential to every portfolio. It's true that the nature of the procedure code requires almost every file to come to finance. And if not finance, considering I'm also the Minister for Human Resources, pretty much every file comes to me at some point. So I do sign, I learn. But in a democracy, and especially in a political system that we have, it behooves a man of my relative junior status in politics to be self-contained and limit myself to my own departments and my own responsibilities. So one of the reasons I haven't been here a lot is that neither is my department in terms of finance and human resources specific to any one district or even planning and development, nor in the way our party and our Chief Minister has broken up the responsibilities across the cabinet. Am I responsible for this part of the country in terms of facilitating between the government and the district? My fellow minister, the electricity minister and excise, has that responsibility. So I try to stay within my bounds, and though many issues raised today have aspects of other industries, other departments, other government departments, I won't duck them. I'll touch upon them where they have some macro or policy or financial implications for the government, but I won't go too far into those. I can talk a lot about the GST issues because I am the member representing Tamil Nadu on the GST Council. I can also talk about some broader issues like Metro Rail because I'm also the Minister for Planning, Development and Special Initiatives that includes things like the Metro Rail. And I think philosophically about the nature of infrastructure investment and the way we see the future in our government. Let me start by saying that philosophy is important, identity is important. We come to politics because we have a particular understanding of how society ought to work, what are the values based on which the administration must be run. And people like my Chief Minister, people like me, every action, every file, every time I speak, I try and tie back all of those to the philosophy and the motivation that brought us here. In that sense, I hope we are as clear ideologues as anybody in this country. But as important as that is, execution matters a lot more. At the end of the day, results speak. And I've on record in many places saying that no matter what my philosophy, if there had not been, at least in the state of Tamil Nadu, the benefits that the Dravidian movement, the notions of self-respect, social justice, inclusive growth, education for all, upliftment of women, equal opportunities, if these had not been as successful as they have proven to be in the last 100 plus years of the Dravidian movement and the Justice Party's birth, then maybe I would also reconsider my philosophy. But the results tell me that what we're doing gives us good outcomes. I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm not saying that we can't do better, but at the end of the day, we look at the results, we look at the outcomes. In that sense, Coimbatore is a very interesting place for me. At a personal level, I always wondered why my grandfather had such an affinity with Coimbatore and a lot of the families here, and I learned very late that his mother was from Coimbatore, and so that's why he had the ties. Unfortunately, in my father's time and my time, we lost those relationships. We're slowly building them back. But as I've mentioned somewhere else, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention it, every time I come here, I feel a bit of sadness in my heart that what was once the hub, if not the hub, the strong pillar of the Justice Party and the social justice movement has seemingly, after success, after growth, after capitalistic benefits, moved away towards some other philosophy. That always pains me, I must say. As for me, most of you know my family history. We are very, very focused. Circumstances may change, our values don't change at all, we stay the same. In that sense, as much as it is important that we want to uplift the bottom of the pyramid, as much as it's clear in our agenda that we want a more equitable, more harmonious, better distributed of wealth and opportunity society, we also understand that growth is crucial, right? I mean, at the end of the day, everything else is a means of optimizing the benefits that ought to arise from growth and employment opportunities. So we try in many ways to look at how we can improve the overall growth while ensuring that the disparity between the rich and the poor, the disparity between one region and another, doesn't become excessive and cause a kind of disruption in the social fabric. My Chief Minister is very clear. He says, I want no one left behind, Ellorukum Ellam, and I want every district to progress, and I want to make sure that the benefits of growth reach all segments of society, no matter what the historical kind of structure of the caste system and all may have been. Coimbatore has some specific issues. Let me talk about a few of them. The collector has already talked about the fundamental change to the approval process, at least as far as infrastructure, as far as building related activities, resident associations, so forth, that we are envisioning. Both Madurai and Coimbatore will become urban development authorities and will come with a kind of single window clearance that is the equivalent of the CMDA in Chennai. So that should ease some of those problems. In terms of the two components required for successful execution and growth of all industries, but particularly MSMEs, one capital and the other being labor. On the capital side, we have already looked at a few different aspects of better financing for MSMEs. We learnt a lot during the pandemic, as many of you also did, with much harder kind of circumstances. By coincidence, or maybe not so much coincidence, the MSME secretary for the government of Tamil Nadu also double hats as my expenditure secretary in the finance department. So I stay connected with that department quite extensively. And the systems could be better. We are a developing country. We could have a better capital base. All those are true. I think we have some more macro plans that will resolve that in the medium term. But in the short term, the two things we discovered immediately after coming to office, almost 80% of the schemes announced by the Union government or the Reserve Bank, or even for that matter by the state government, were not actually reaching the MSMEs, reaching their owners, their office bearers, and they were not availing of the benefits. That's a common problem in government. We come up with some idea, we think that if we once publish it or announce it in the budget and let it go, it actually will execute by itself. But in fact, what we have learned is that we need much, much more integrated between the banks, the government, and the entrepreneurs. Better communication, better training, better dissemination, etc. So last year we set up this pilot initiative that at every district MSME department staff should be given training and integrated with the district level bankers committees, and see if we can better facilitate between the MSMEs and the banks as a start. And then of course there's other sources of capital, including the government, where we're increasingly making off-balance sheet funds through things like the Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Development Corporation, Fund Management Corporation. But part of this requires some multi-level thinking. So one of the things I've done ever since I've become finance minister is that I personally attend every state level bankers committee meeting, make sure that a lot of senior officers of government attend it, make sure that the fiscal policies and the legislative priorities of the government and the assembly are interwoven with the bank's performance and scrutiny of their delivery of results. And I've been glad to say that in the last year we're actually seeing, I'm not saying it's improved completely, but we're seeing a much better accountability on the part of banks through the state level bankers committee to penetrate and disseminate and distribute the kinds of schemes that both the union government and the state government put up. I hope that continues, and we're certainly welcome to suggestions to implement those. Going to the labor side, really people here talked about two types of labor. One, our own domestic labor and the skill development required to make them kind of job ready, which, as you all know, the Chief Minister has taken as his kind of pet project, or really prioritized the non-movable scheme to first reskill and upskill the existing unemployed youth, but much more importantly, focus and drive the output of the education system towards where the industry and the services and goods industry needs the actual skills and talents. So we're starting with guidance counselors at schools, not just for students but their parents, statistical data on where the jobs are, what they pay, what kind of progression you can expect if you graduate with certain skills. We have a very high gross enrollment ratio for higher education in our state, almost double the national average. But I think we can all admit that that doesn't really mean that they are job ready in terms of skills. So as much as we are proud that Education for All has given the kind of social mobility that we dreamed of in the Dravidian movement, we need to also focus a lot more on having the right ratio of skills at each level. So, at the polytechnic level, at the ITI level, at the complex skills like HVAC or pressure pump plumbing or precision machining, we're woefully short. So we have some plans in place. We have announced major investments in upgrading the ITIs, some privately, some with corporate partnerships. And you can be sure that in a couple of years we'll get even more detailed about what a good system looks like. Is an integration of good Bureau of Labor Statistics type organization that tells you where the jobs are, where the gaps are, what the wages are, what the progression is, and that is a continuous data collection system. And then it integrates with the equivalent of a commerce department or an industries department, where we start planning which sectors, what growth, therefore how will the demands improve, therefore what kinds of opportunities should people be working towards, and then integrating those and making sure the people in the schools and their parents get to know it. I met some people earlier today, and they're very inspiring young people going to this competition in Monaco. And Mr. Shankar was saying how many of them are first generation. That's not atypical, right? Because we went from, when I graduated engineering in 1987, I think the state of Tamil Nadu produced maybe 3 or 4,000 engineers. I think last year it was more like 150,000. That has some questions about quality and all that. But it also says that a lot of these people have nobody in their family to guide them. A lot of them are first generation graduates, maybe altogether, definitely first generation professional graduates, and there's nobody to tell them, which path to take, or what are the ups and downs and pitfalls and benefits of different things. So this guidance counseling is not just for students but their parents as well. But we're working on that. On the migrant worker front, again, we learned a lot during COVID. We learned there were many more people than we thought they were here. We know that we have to do a better job. So I've already announced in the budget this year a pilot registration program, so we can identify where they are, ensure they get the right benefits, ensure that their quality of life is kind of maintained, access to healthcare, access to the PDS if they need it. Also, we have announced the building of workers' hostels, migrant workers' hostels, first as a government attempt, and then we'll consider them as PPP projects. Even within the TNI-FMC that I mentioned, where I've taken over as the chairman, we have a shelter fund in which we're working with some large corporates on a pilot project where we will build worker dormitories for that conglomerate, and they will pay the rent for it, and basically we'll make sure the execution goes smoothly. So we have a few things in the pipeline, but again, I talk more at the minister level or at the the finance minister level or the funding level. I'm not the industries minister. I don't want to step on his turf. On the other issues, I think the one really issue that was not brought up today, I want to bring here and leave with you for some contemplation. When we came to office in May 2021, the second wave was reaching its peak. And I think, the second wave was much, much worse than the first wave. We struggled really. We didn't have the medical infrastructure. We didn't have the oxygen. In Madurai, we were within 24 hours of running out of oxygen. But, with the help of many friends from many parts of India and other places, we overcame that. We learnt a lot. We built the facilities. We ensured it wasn't great oxygen because it was industrial oxygen. It led to some negative consequences like the black fungus disease. But that was rare. Overall, we did, I would say, a good job. And since then, of course, we've built all the oxygen capacity that we'll need were we to face another wave, and we've learned how to build hospital capacity. So even though the case numbers are rising, we're reasonably sanguine that we can handle this time because we learned last time. We also learned some long-term lessons that Tamil Nadu is hugely underweight in the production of pharmaceuticals and drugs, and so the government has put up a special policy, came to cabinet a few days ago to incentivize in that sector investments. We want to become equal weight at least in the manufacture of these products across the relative to the country, and for multiple reasons, including should there be another outbreak of some other pandemic or some other epidemic. But the point I want to make here is that in Madurai, we had a peak of about 1,500 cases a day in the latter part of May, and we were able to bring it down to less than 200 cases a day in about 6 weeks, because we took a very distributed strategy. Different ministers were assigned different districts. We did a lot of things right, and we were by far the best in the state. It got written up as a Lancet study and all that, and we kept our names out of it, so it was just a very technical assessment. The worst performing district in Tamil Nadu at that time was Kovai. Kovai's rate took 3 months or more to really come down to that level, and that was because the spread had already reached the villages before the kind of concentrated action took place. And for all the other ways that Coimbatore is a kind of front runner in Tamil Nadu, something wasn't done that well. If that's the front end, then partly suggested by our global advisors, partly in anticipation, on the back end, we did a kind of threefold survey: vaccine penetration, antibody incidence, and demographics, to start preparing for the potential third wave in September, October. And places like Madurai showed 80-85% antibodies. Again, Kovai had the lowest, was about 65 or 68% antibodies. So, maybe there's something we need to do differently here in those kinds of contexts. I'm sure the collector will look into this in more detail.